Hello and welcome to the MovieKing Podcast. My name is David Jurmann and I'll be your host. On today's episode, I'm going to review the film Flight Risk. This is a new film from director Mel Gibson about a government witness who is being transported on a plane along with a U.S. Marshal who has a dark past and a mysterious pilot played by Mark Wahlberg. And as it turns out, things are not quite what they seemed. Now, on paper, I think this sounds really cool. I actually really like the idea, and I'm not trying to give a lot away because it's probably more interesting when you don't know the twist that was basically shown in the trailers. The trailer kind of does tell you what this movie really is. And if you've avoided the trailer, I think there's at least one pleasant surprise to be had in this movie. But still, the idea itself is neat and got me intrigued. And say what you want about Mel Gibson as a person, but he has proven to be a very talented filmmaker over the years. Most recently with Hacksaw Ridge, which I absolutely loved. I mean, if you have not seen that movie, you are missing out because it is a truly great and emotional story. One of my favorite movies from, I believe it was 2016. I haven't even seen it since then, weirdly enough, but it still sticks in my mind a lot. And I think that really says how good it is because I still think about it, even though I haven't seen it in probably 8 years now. And for Mel Gibson to go from that serious Oscar-worthy film to something in more of a B tier is definitely a choice, but a welcome one at that. Because who doesn't like a good B movie, I mean, they're fun, they're silly, they're a bit goofy, they're very different from, a more serious movie like Hacksaw Ridge, but they're fun, they're entertaining. Plus you have Mark Wahlberg and Topher Grace involved, and it's basically a one-location thriller, and you have a lot of potential to be something epic there. I think there's at least a lot of interesting pieces at play here where you're like, oh, this could be a really cool movie. Unfortunately, though, this movie is very far from epic. The better word for this movie would be dumb. There are guilty pleasure dumb movies, and then there are dumb movies. This is the latter. I'm fully aware, there's some movies like Fast and Furious where you're just, the whole point is that they're dumb. You sit back, you eat some popcorn, you turn your brain off, you just have a good time. And then this movie is in that weird realm of, it is dumb and it kind of knows it's dumb, but it's not fun to watch. It's just dumb. I'm totally okay with bypassing some logic in a movie if needed, but this movie constantly asks me to do it over and over and over again, to the point where it got ridiculous. I was just sitting there what is happening right now? What is this movie? These characters are doing things that don't make any sense. Why don't you do, this, and instead you're doing that? And it's just a lot of things where you're just constantly, internally yelling at the characters, do something smarter, please, just you can save yourself, just do this. So I think there's just a lot of that throughout the movie, and that really takes a lot of way in terms of enjoyment and just overall just letting yourself be able to just get immersed in the story. Because this movie makes very little sense in the plot, and I was rolling my eyes the whole time. It was literally like every 5 minutes something would happen that's really? That's what... Oh, really? And, the plot is also just very predictable, so there's not much in the way of surprises. If you already know the big reveal, the one I mentioned from the trailers, if you know that already, then the whole rest of the movie is very obvious. There's not much else to really get invested in. If you don't know, it's at least, adds a little bit of something to the movie to be oh, that's pretty interesting. But that's really frustrating to me, that the movie just doesn't really have much of surprise. It also doesn't help that in this movie's downtime, it's pretty boring. There's really nothing of interest happening, and the characters are as flat as a piece of paper. There's just nothing interesting about any of them. There's nothing interesting really about what's happening. It's very boring. For a movie that's supposed to be this big thriller, when it's not in the really stupid, dumb action scenes, those are at least kind of entertaining to watch. Not even in a good way of entertaining, just entertaining and okay, at least this is so silly, I'm at least laughing at it. But the rest of the movie, though, is just very boring, and I'll be honest, I felt myself getting sleepy watching it, which doesn't really happen to me often. I was just please, can something at least happen? All the dialogue was terrible, it was just really, really bad. But as I said, thankfully, whenever there's some action going on, it's at least kind of entertaining. but more in an ironic way where I could at least laugh along with it. And the same goes for the humor, which is never funny for the reasons it wants to be. It's just the humor is terrible. Like every joke, like it's trying to be funny. Like there's a lot of jokes in the movie. Very few of them, if any of them, maybe even land. Like I was almost every joke is like you're either laughing at it for the wrong reason or you're not laughing at all and you're just kind of cringing. But it either had me groaning or laughing at how bad the jokes were. And this movie really just feels like Mel Gibson shot a script that only had the first draft written. You know, like when you write a screenplay, you have the first draft, second draft, third draft, you have several drafts, and then you have the final draft, which is what you shoot with. This movie just feels like they had a first draft of a script, and then just, took it and ran with it. Like, they didn't even try to fix it up. I believe the script was made pretty big on the blacklist as one of the better unproduced scripts in recent memory, and I'm guessing either something significant was changed from it, or it was poor direction, or it was literally just the first draft of the script. And it's very hard to figure out which one it is because, I'm like, if the script was actually on the blacklist, then I don't believe they would have just shot it as it was written. Like, because, they have usually pretty good scripts on there, and I'm thinking maybe something could have been changed from when they got it, and maybe just, like, someone tweaked it a lot, or maybe, Mel Gibson, he is a good director usually. I don't know, though. It felt like he was really phoning it in here. I don't know if maybe he just, sometimes when you have a script and a director that don't really mesh, sometimes it can feel a little bit like something's missing. Maybe that happened here. I just don't know. It's really hard to figure out what happened, and it's hard to believe this script was approved and well liked exactly as it was written on the page, when it was found, because it's terrible. Like the writing here is just terrible. I don't know. I don't know what happened. Again, I'm thinking like maybe there is a reality where if it was directed by someone else, maybe the writing would be a little more, fun. But I don't know. Just something didn't click at all in the way this movie was made. And a few other things I want to mention. This movie has absolutely horrible CGI. Like, in an age where we're seeing these incredible visual effects with, like, even Mufasa, which looked pretty good, Sonic, and Better Man, like, all these movies that have really realistic-looking creatures and animals and landscapes and all this crazy stuff, this movie looks like even worse than, like, a CW show. Like, it has such poor effects. Like, it's a sci-fi original movie kind of effects, or a streaming movie that was, like, very low budget. There's this deer, I think, or a moose in the beginning of the movie, and I was like, that's, like, the least convincing animal I've ever seen in my life. It's just so bad. And another thing is, this movie has very boring production design. Look, I get that this movie takes place on a plane for the majority of the film. It just doesn't help the fact that there's nothing interesting on the plane, like, to look at. It's like, from a visual perspective, there's just nothing to really, like, there's just nothing going on. It's literally like you're just looking at a jet, and you're just like, there's just nothing interesting to look at. And I think as a result, it just makes the movie very bland looking and feeling. Like, it feels almost like you're just watching someone on a set. Like, it doesn't really feel like you're actually, like, on a plane or something. So that was pretty disappointing, and I have to say the actors couldn't even save this movie. Even Mark Wahlberg couldn't save it. He's, like, probably the best part of the movie. Whenever he's on screen, it's like he's doing something pretty entertaining, again, pretty ironically, but he's at least having fun. But, like, even he couldn't do it. Like, even he couldn't really bring enough life into this movie to make it entertaining enough or engaging enough to really want to see what happens next. All the rest of the actors aren't very good. Again, I don't really know what happened. Topher Grace is usually pretty entertaining. I don't know what happened to him. Again, I think the writing really just did a lot of damage, and the direction and delivery just really didn't work. And you have a few characters who you really only hear a lot of the time on the phone. You don't really see them in person, so their performances were also kind of falling flat. It just sounded like they were talking to nobody, and, they weren't really interacting as actors. It just didn't work. So, I don't know. I can't really recommend this movie to anyone, even if you enjoy B-movies. Like, even if you have a good time with these very cheesy, goofy blockbusters, like, even if you enjoy those, I just don't know if I can recommend this to anyone, really. Like, even if it were a Netflix original and it was just on streaming, it's not a good one. It's not worth your time or money, unless... And this is where I'll get into my second aspect of this review. I went to see this movie in theaters, but not just any theater. It was in 4DX. This is a premium format typically found at Regal Cinemas in the US, and the format is basically what it sounds like. IMAX, Dolby, RPX, Prime, all these other formats are focused on delivering the best quality picture and sound and a very immersive experience. 4DX, on the other hand, is focused on giving, I'd say, the most fun experience. You basically watch the movie in a standard auditorium, but the entire theater is modded with like equipment to flash lights and spray water, blow wind, add smells and fog, and the seats move in sync with the movie. They have this ability to like spray air at your neck and legs, and then kind of like lightly tap you in the back, or kind of like, I don't want to say hit you in the back, but they kind of like give you a little nudge in the back, like if someone's getting punched. It's basically a theme park ride, and that's why I love the experience. But like all premium formats, though, not every movie benefits from being seen in a special format, especially one like this. Flight Risk does, though. I've only seen a few 4DX movies in my lifetime, basically because they're very expensive. It's probably around $20 to $25 a ticket. It's a little more than IMAX even, probably. But in my experience, I'd say it's very much worth the price of admission. Like, every time I've went, I've been like, yeah, that was really fun. Like, I'm really glad I did that. Because for a special occasion, for the right movie, in a movie like Flight Risk, where you're just supposed to sit back and have fun, even, if I didn't in this case, it makes a bad movie a lot more watchable than it would have been otherwise. And I say that because it just adds, like, this level of immersion to the movie that you wouldn't get in a normal theater. Like, I literally could have just fallen asleep in another movie theater. But you can't when you're being, like, rocked around and shook in your seat and you're getting sprayed with water. Like, you can't fall asleep through that. So, it makes even not-so-good movies more entertaining. And I think the first time I ever did a 4DX movie was actually Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which, I saw it once in regular theaters. I didn't really like the movie. I saw it again in 4DX, mainly just because I wanted to try out the format. And I didn't like the movie better, but I had a more fun time watching it. But in the case of Flight Risk, the movie takes place mostly on a plane for the vast majority of a runtime, and it really feels like you're taking off and in the air when it happens. Like, your seat just really, like, shakes a little bit. You feel like you're really, like, moving on a plane. And when, the plane sort of tilts left, like, your seats kind of go left a little bit. It really adds a lot of immersion. And when characters get punched, you feel it. When a plane crashes into something, you feel it. When a taser is used on a character, you can kind of see the light change in the theater, like it flashes a bit. And believe me, I actively avoided this format for a long time because I assumed it would be very distracting. Like, I'm someone who wants to just be completely immersed in whatever I'm watching. I don't want, stupid gimmicks when I'm watching a movie. And during the trailers, like, when you're watching the movie, you can 100% convince me it's just a gimmick. It's very aggressive, like, the shaking and everything, like, it's so aggressive. Like, you're literally just like, if this is what the movie's gonna be like, I'm not gonna have a good time here. But the movie is not like that at all once it actually starts up. During the movie, though, it's surprisingly very precise movements that sync up with the movie. Like, I have to say, every time I've gone, I've just been super impressed with how precise it is. That's really, like, precise is the right word for it, because sometimes it'll be very subtle movements that you're just like, it feels like, wow, they really put a lot of thought into this and how much, things are supposed to move and when you're supposed to tilt up and down. And it's just, it doesn't feel like a gimmick. It actually feels like something that enhances the movie, kind of like 3D in a way when 3D is used right. And that's kind of how 4DX would be too. Like, not every movie needs to be seen in 3D. Not every movie benefits as much from 3D. But when you see the right thing in 3D, like an Avatar, The Way of Water, it adds a lot of immersion. And that's kind of what 4DX is kind of doing here. But even when it gets, like, really precise, during the more dialogue-heavy scenes without much action happening, it basically takes a break on the effect so you can focus on what's being said. And I appreciate that because, again, I'm like someone who really wants to pay attention to the movie. I want to be able to be totally immersed in what's happening, and if I'm being jolted around the entire movie, I may not, get every word that's being said. But in 4DX, it's what I appreciate is that, like, if not much is happening, you won't really feel any movements, you're not going to have a lot of sense or anything going on, so you can just pay attention and just enjoy the movie, and I like that. If I actually had a complaint about this experience with Flight Risk, it's actually that there maybe was a little too much downtime in this format for this movie. There's just a lot of talking scenes where not much is happening, and I think, maybe I would have actually liked a little more, like, just tilting with the plane movements or something, just a little more immersion, just because, there's just a lot of times during the movie where nothing's happening in the movie or in the experience, so that was a little disappointing. But I will say, when it gets intense, it's genuinely insane. There are scenes in this movie that wouldn't have been very intense at all otherwise, like in any other theater, but in this format, my heart was like racing afterward, because I was just thrown around in my seat. I was like, I just felt like I was on like this crazy roller coaster afterwards. I could hear others in my theater literally catching their breath after a few scenes, just to show how crazy it got, because, it definitely wasn't because of the movie, it was because of the 4DX. So that was really fun. And, I really just wanted to shout out 4DX while I'm reviewing this very bad movie, because I feel like it actually gives me something else to talk about, and this movie doesn't really have that much to say, but I think if you're going to watch this movie at all, I will say 4DX is probably the one way I can actually recommend it, and it's the one way I would maybe say, like, oh, that actually kind of was worth watching, and I don't regret paying to see it. I actually could have seen this movie for free with A-List, but, I decided to pay a lot of money to go see this in 4DX at Regal because the movie was advertising it would be a lot of fun in 4DX, and I kind of was like, you know what? This does seem like a fun movie for the format, and I gave it a shot, and I don't regret paying for it. I just think it's a terrible movie. Like, don't see this movie, but, if you're going to, at least see it the right way. Go see it in 4DX. Or watch it on streaming. Don't pay this to see it in theaters otherwise. And while I'm here also, I just want to say that this part of the review is in no way sponsored by 4DX at all. I'm not being paid for this. This isn't sponsored. I just really like the format, and I want to give it some attention. I wouldn't choose it for any movie, but for the right one, it's a blast. So, I don't know. 4DX experience was a lot of fun here. As for the movie itself, it's very, very bad. There's just enough, few entertaining moments that I can't, say it's the worst movie I've ever seen, but, don't get me wrong, it's still really, really bad. I'm going to rate it a D. And that about does it for this episode. If you want to follow my reviews, you can find me on Letterboxd at MovieKing1224. You can also listen to this podcast on your favorite apps such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. If you have any comments or feedback, I would love to hear it and improve the show. And of course, if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to hear more like it. I appreciate you all so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.